Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Owning Your Legacy. Before we jump in, a note on the content this week. This episode discusses suicide, which may be distressing to some listeners. If you or anyone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide, please contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by calling 988 or texting TALK, TALK, to 8255. Thanks so much.
The fact that our young people are learning that it's okay to ask for help, that's an amazing win. Like, let's get through that there's not enough therapists now, that kids know that it's okay
Mm.
to ask for help. I don't have to deal with this on my own. I don't have to feel not worthy. I don't have to feel like I'm a burden. I can ask for help.
Hi, Kari. Thank you for joining us on Owning Your Legacy. And if you wouldn't mind, take a minute to introduce yourself.
My name is Kari Eckert. I'm the executive director of Robbie's Hope, but most importantly, I am Robbie's mom.
So, welcome to Owning Your Legacy podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really happy to have you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
I'd love you to tell our guests a little bit about Robbie's Hope and the history of Robbie's Hope.
Yeah, Robbie's Hope is an organization, a nonprofit that my husband and I founded in the fall of 2018 after the death of our son, Robbie. Robbie was 15 years old and he died by suicide. We didn't know that Robbie was struggling. He absolutely showed the opposite. He was a smiley, bright, really fun kid, student athlete. And prior to raising my children, I was a funeral director. I don't know if you know that about me, kind of a
I did just learn that about you, and I did not know that about you. And I think that is it's interesting. It's almost foreshadowing of, knowing what your calling has
Yeah,
become.
yeah, I agree with you. So I feel like right away I knew what the journey that Jason and I were about to enter, being losing a child to suicide, because I had sat on the other side of the table. And we wanted to do something from the get-go. We didn't want other parents to walk the journey that we were starting to walk. And we learned that suicide was the leading cause of death of teenagers in our state. We live in Denver, in Colorado. So we put it upon ourselves that we have to change that. So that's what Robbie's Hope is the catalyst, and Robbie's Hope is a foundation that we run. And the goal of Robbie's Hope is to try to bring the youth's voice to the table
Hmm.
being the conversation of youth mental health in an effort to
Yes.
reduce teen suicide rates.
Right. I just read my brother, funny enough, sent an article. It was really deep and really good. And it was an older, I call it, a man in his 50s or even 60s. And he was talking about his best friend that he grew up with. And this guy was like happy and really lighthearted. And somewhere in his adult life, depression hit him. Kind of, it sounded like almost out of the blue. And he was definitely under doctor's care and had, was married, had kids of his own, really working on it, and never could overcome it. And finally took his own life and said he was just so sick and tired of being a burden to his family. And then I knew I was going to be talking to you this week, and I'm like, oh, I want to talk to Kari about that because I got that. Like, I got, like, he was working on it and he couldn't get out of the darkness, and the whole burden thing, like that burden thing. Teaching I guess our children is what we're talking about at the moment of you're never a burden, no matter how dark it might get. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an absolute sign of a person that has a depression, probably diagnosable depression, when your mind tells you that you're a burden. Um,
Mm-hmm.
um, that's an absolute red flag. If your mind ever tells yourself that, you have to ask for help. That's that's not okay. Your brain is not working the way your brain is supposed to work. Um, Teaching your child, you are never a burden, never.
Right. Right.
Uh, it's a tough one. I can't. That one's really hard for me to think that Robbie thought that he was a burden. Um,
And
that
I
hits me
mean,
to the
and
core.
you don't feel that way though. I've never heard you say that though, and I don't think.
No, I mean, yes, I feel that way in my private moments,
Mm-hmm.
when I try to figure out the why of why my son chose suicide. I work really hard to not put a lot of time and energy into that why. I don't feel like it leads to any, it doesn't lead to
Peace.
help. Yeah, no, it doesn't lead to peace. It doesn't lead to helping me. It doesn't lead to my ability to help others. I don't know. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
when I have that opportunity to have those answers, I'm a believer. I'll be with my maker and I'll be with my son, and I won't care about what the why was.
Oh, I love that, Kari. That's beautiful. That was a beautiful visual. And I do believe all the work that you're doing with these other children has got to be healing and obviously bring you joy and happiness. And like you were even mentioning before we jumped on the call, of seeing the kids that work with you at Robbie's Hope and their growth. I think that
That
it's got to be so fulfilling. So talk
it's
a
so
little bit
rewarding.
about it's been a couple of years now. Was it 2019 that you started Robbie's Hope? Is that
The
right?
fall of 2018. So we're almost at our
2018.
5 year mark.
Wow. And yeah, talk about, the impact. And I know some of it that I'm really excited about, particularly scaling. So how are you feeling as far as what you guys have accomplished?
I'm proud of what we've accomplished. I'm proud that we are bringing solutions to the table instead of just being victims. I'm proud that we can wear that hats that we wear, that I can bring a difficult, perspective to other parents and still leave them with tools and resources and encourage them to have conversations versus just implanting fear. I know we're making a difference with young people. I know it's a big, big mountain to climb, but we keep going.
Yeah, one life at a time, potentially, I think.
If it is one life, it's worth it.
Exactly. And how about, COVID? And I got to say, you guys did a phenomenal job at the gala that you had to, of course, do virtually. And I think you obviously know. So we had like a big tent in my backyard and we made an event of it that we so needed. It was October, I believe, and it was really nice out. And I had my team, some of my neighbors. We had catered food. My kids were at it. And you played that game.
Oh, yeah.
That was hysterical. That was because you were doing like acronyms and stuff that we don't understand when our kids talk. Particularly my 15-year-old speaks another language, and my 16-year-old, ever since Declan's been born, Christopher has translated for me. I've never understood the kid. I mean, I do understand him, but he speaks in like code. So that he was sitting right next to me when you were playing that game, and we were laughing. I didn't know any of the acronyms, and it just goes to show it's like getting into their lives a little more. And I try. They just tease me though when I try to be like, "What are you talking about?" Like,
But that's
yeah,
making you human to them that you try. Like, that's something
yeah.
I absolutely miss about Robbie. Like, Robbie was that kid. Like, his language was just because he was fun.
Hmm.
Yeah, Robbie's Hope it's fantastic. I think one thing that has been able to bring success to Robbie's Hope is that we stay pretty organic and we're not like one size fits all and this is what you have to do. Like we're listening to teens, and teens have changed in the last 4.5 years. Like they're in a different time now post COVID, and 4 years from
Right.
now they will be in a different time. So staying like being able to respond to what they bring to us, like, hey, let's try this. Yeah, let's try this.
Hmm.
That's what I'm really proud of for Robbie's Hope.
And did you see? I mean, just in general in the world, we heard one of my girlfriends is a psychologist, and during COVID, she's like, she was burnt, totally burnt out. She's like, everybody in the world is stressed beyond belief. So, as far as Robbie's Hope goes, did you see a uptick in really stressed out, anxious young adults?
Absolutely. And I think some of that, though, it comes from like a lot more young people are asking for help.
That's great.
And it is a good thing. Like it's a hard thing because it's really hard to get your kid into therapy right now. But the
Right.
fact that our young people are learning that it's okay to ask for help, that's an amazing win. Like let's get through that there's not enough therapists now. That kids know that it's okay to ask for help. I don't have to deal with this on my own. I don't have to feel not worthy. I don't have to feel like I'm a burden. I can ask for help.
Yeah. So, what do you think the shortage in therapists is do too.
Our healthcare system overall, it's very, very broken, and a lot of it boils down to finances, sadly. Um, I feel like to get kids the help that we need to turn this conversation to every single dinner table in America. Like, and
Yeah.
you talked about that, like having conversations at the table. Like, yes, some of our population will have a diagnosable mental illness. It's about 1 in 5. That has held true pre-COVID, post-COVID, and hopefully that will hold true overall. But more and more kids are identifying that they struggle with depression and anxiety. Um, we have to be able to get them help, like, and you as a parent can get bring them help by having
Mm-hmm.
conversations, by normalizing their feelings. Our kids are growing up in a world of social media. It's very, very different than what you and I grew up with.
I heard one of the young women that was a part of Female Strong, and somewhere between 6th and 8th grade, and she's like, I have anxiety over my anxiety. And I'm like, wow, like I get that, but that is so wrong. That young.
Very hard to hear. Yeah. They say that kindergartners are coming to school with anxiety.
Yeah, we gotta change this trajectory. That's just not right.
Absolutely.
So my son Gavin, who's 22 and he's at Iowa, one of his dear friends, her name was Kendall. She took her life a couple years ago, and Gavin was asked, the only friend asked to do the eulogy, or a eulogy. I think her family did too, but he was the only friend, and it was beautiful. Oh my, I was like, wow. And this kid is a creative writer, a poet, and just like a really big teddy bear. But yeah, it's so hard for kids to go through. He misses her. I know he misses her dearly. And
Transformational point in his life. I'm sure that he will come back to that the rest of his life. Jason and I were just having a conversation with one of Robbie's very good friends. She is now with the mom and dad. And the
mm-hmm,
dad teared up saying, like, Robbie's death was an absolute, she was a junior in high school at the time of his death. She's now a junior in
mm-hmm,
college out at UCLA. Just changing point for her, like totally changed the
mm-hmm,
trajectory of her life. And this dad's, so proud of, I'm sure is you're proud of Gavin, like the way that he was able to handle that, the way that she has handled his death.
mm-hmm. I mean, that's another potential silver lining to any life. It's like, I think of my sister lost a baby in birth, and just that was like such deep sadness. But and how she was so strong and got through it, and how she gives back to others now through breath work and things like that. It's like, making that hopeful and finding some joy and happiness and peace for other people, I think is kind of the key.
It feels really good to give back. I mean, it's like I get more than I give, and I'm so grateful that I am able to do that. I know that other parents that have experienced my type of loss, some people never recover, and
That's
that's
so true. What do you attribute that to? I mean, I don't blame them in any stretch, but is it just kind of getting stuck, or what do you think happens there?
sometimes you want to be just a victim. You want other people to know what you're carrying, just not really the world that we live in. And it's just heavy. Like you just, sometimes everything that you see is through the lens of your loss. And it's exhausting.
I remember thinking that even, my dad passed, which, was absolutely natural and should have happened, but just how can everyone be smiling? Like, you go through that period of your, like, you definitely get through it, but you can't even imagine that the world is going on around you. It's a really kind of surreal feeling.
That's a normal stage of grief, going back to Elizabeth
Exactly.
Kubler-Ross. But when, like,
Yeah.
our loss would be classified as like a complicated loss, and you can just get stuck. And I think that's what happened. You can't go through. At beginning, I've done a lot of grief work, a ton of grief work, and I hated the word healing because I felt like it was really like disrespectful to Robbie. Like, I don't want to be healed. Like
Ooh,
that means
ooh,
that
I get that. I get that.
I've moved
Yeah.
on. And now, probably about the 3.5 year mark, I was like, I think I'm ready to heal. Like I think I
Mm-hmm.
can still carry Robbie and my loss with me, but I can be healed. Like I don't always have to be in that brokenness.
It can be an and situation. I love that. And you know what? That's what he'd want, I
Yeah.
think. He would definitely want you to remember him and to be healed. I think that's beautiful. So you were talking about the stigmas, and I think that would be great for our audience and for me to even understand. Sometimes we don't even know we're saying things in the wrong way. So talk a little bit about that.
A lot of people and people who have lost someone will say my child or my spouse or my brother committed suicide. I That's not a word that people in prevention like to use, and it's because it's triggering. Um, my son did not commit a crime. My son did not commit a sin. My son died of a mental illness, just like you would
Mm,
say, that died of cancer. You would never say
right.
committed cancer. So that can be a very, very triggering thing.
And when you say it that way, it just makes total sense.
I was just in a meeting earlier today, and somebody that I was with was talking about where he needed to sit, and he said it's because I have OCD. And I was like, I just listened, and then the other person at the table said, "Well, I always know where the exit is," and I was like, "Okay, here we are." The amount of like collective trauma and label that we use as a generation, like we are constantly being triggered to like really adverse things. There's shootings all of the time.
Right.
OCD is not a negative trait, but those are stigmatizing terms that we use. It's a hard part about like depression and anxiety. They can be diagnosable, but they're normal human emotions as well.
True. That's very true. I also liked you were talking in something I was reading or one of your podcasts, and you were saying, especially to teachers, that they believe in the myth that they are planting a seed if they say to a child something, are you contemplating suicide? Or, that, and I think you were stating that that's a myth. You can't really plant that seed. So talk
Yeah,
about that a little bit
absolutely.
more.
Yeah, that's a huge myth. It's more a generational thing that you can plant the seed of suicide. If you're concerned about someone, you can't ask them because then you're like encouraging them. And it's what's used often, sadly, in like the world and postvention of like when a death has occurred in a high school, oftentimes educators and administrators, they don't think that they can't talk about it. And we have to talk about it. It's like if you're sitting with someone, you think that they're struggling, you put it out there. Are you considering hurting yourself? Are you
Mm-hmm.
considering hurting yourself versus you aren't considering hurting yourself because the you aren't means, hey, that's not okay with me. I'm not okay with a yes answer. You want to be okay with a yes. And most of the time, you are not going to get, yes, I am considering hurting myself. No, I'm just in a really, really bad place. I feel like this. And then the
Mm-hmm.
conversation starts to happen. So, yeah, there's a lot of myths surrounding suicide. Suicide is super complex.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of I think I shared this with you, but not 100% sure. My son, Garrett, the one that's in Denver, had a really bad breakup. So he's the 27-year-old, and it was right in the middle of COVID. He had moved to Colorado with his longtime girlfriend. They'd been dating, a little bit of high school all through college. Kind of, thought that was the one. He was he was in a job that he did not like at all. Admittedly, he was not in a good place. And really, one Sunday morning, she kind of up and left. And this is the kid that I never really, back to what you were saying about Robbie. He's not a kid that I would worry about. He was Division I football, kind of straight A guy. Um, just my easy kid, my oldest, my firstborn. Um, So he was a mess. I vividly remember he was home for the holidays. He went back, and this happened like the Sunday, call it January 3rd or something like that. Vividly remember it was a Sunday because he's like, Mom, I can't, you got to put the iPad. The Bears were playing. He's like, put the iPad in the family room. I need to be in the room with you guys. And that was like, oh, I have chills even talking about it.
Mm.
And I'm like, Garrett, do you need to go to the hospital? And he's like, I think I do. So I didn't say it the way you said it, but I was alluding to, should I be that worried? So I immediately called my therapist. And I'm like, help. I don't know. I really didn't know what to do. And he was so far away. Um, she calmed me down and she said, he's talking. That is great. He's talking. So That's the most important thing. And he was talking. And within 4 days, he was home, Kari. He was back in Chicago, and it took him 6 months to get back on his feet fully. And the first 3 months were dark and heavy, and he was seeing a therapist, thank God. But it was a lot of internal work for him. And it was so nice to see his light back, when we could see. And it was the cutest thing was his brother Gavin, the 22-year-old, again, weird COVID time, came home from Iowa, and just to stand witness and watch his brother. Like, he didn't do anything, but he wouldn't go back to school because he didn't want to leave Garrett's side. It was so sweet. And I
Wow.
remember the day Gavin was like, Mom, I think I'm going to go back to Iowa. Garrett's good now. And I'm like, oh, you're so cute. But really, it was just to stand witness and to just support, which was not easy all the time because you didn't know what to do. And I couldn't lighten the darkness. We just had to go through it.
It's hard. It's hard to witness. It's hard to, and it is a process. I love that your boys can be there for one another. Um, you like younger generations are okay with talking more openly, which is just a really beautiful thing.
I think you're right. I think of our generation, well, I think my generation, I'm older than you, but roughly in this generation, I think about that a lot. And I mean, there's harder things they're going through for sure with social media and that, but at least my high school, college, sexuality was not talked about. That had to be hidden, and people couldn't be themselves. At least this generation seems open to being themselves and accepting of that. That's huge. And even to mental illness, to it's okay to not be okay. Love that saying that you guys have. All my kids still have their bracelets.
A
So
wristband.
yes, the wristband, they all still wear it all the time. I think of you every time I see it.
It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not be okay.
Perfect saying. And the meaning of hope. You got to
Hold
see the meaning of
on.
hope. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's great stuff to keep these kids going. And you're right. It always doesn't have to be the mom or the dad. I think leaning on his brothers, leaning on his cousins who are like his brothers was huge during that time. And they rallied like beautifully. One text from me, I'm like, Garrett needs you guys. They were over in 2 minutes, and maybe it's just watching football, but who cares? It's just being together, and.
They use the time frame of 2 or more weeks as like after like a breakup like that or like some type of a event. Like it's normal to get depressed about those types of things. But if the signs or symptoms that you noticed, if they persisted for 2 or more weeks, that's when it could indicate that something deeper is going on.
Yeah, that's really good advice. That is good advice because yeah, I would agree that was probably the worst of it, and it definitely got better and better every day. Okay, so what do you see is next for Robbie's Hope?
There's two things that we need to work on as a society, and Robbie's Hope being the catalyst for that. And one is figuring out social media to a deeper degree. So social media is obviously in correlation with our staggering rates of suicide, our staggering rates of depression and anxiety for our young people, and actually for most age groups. Social media was created to connect people. It's not always doing that. It's dividing people. It's giving people platforms to be really hard on other people.
To bully, I'm sure to bully too, and
Yeah,
that's horrible.
and to make comparisons of ourselves against these other people that like my life, their life is perfect, mine is not. We have to
Yeah.
crack social media. And I understand that some of the social media, like Facebook and Meta, like they have whole departments trying to work on that as well. But it's slow, right? I mean, it's very,
Yeah.
very slow. And then the other thing is education. We don't teach our school children about their brain, the most
Mhm.
powerful organ in their body. We truly don't. There's like no state that's doing it. Like we teach our school children about the cardiovascular system. We teach them about diabetes awareness. We teach them about sexual education, but we never teach them mental health. And we have to do that. Like there are warning signs. There's warning signs of what depression and anxiety look like, that Robbie may have noticed, but he didn't know that he could ask for help. So I think the
Mhm.
education is the next part. And sadly, education it takes money, and it's kind of an area that's being from parents. There's a big movement that parents and school systems we're kind of going backwards in that world right now.
I was, your guidebook that's helpful for parents and teachers. And when you were talking about that, I think of, so Declan has an IEP, so I have a lot of connection with the counselors and the principals and the team that surrounds him, and they're amazing, quite frankly. But the teachers see so much more than we see. When they do, they'll be like, I don't like who, I think you need to talk to Declan about, maybe who he's hanging out with, or, certain stuff that we just don't see from home, and amount of impact that they have on our kids. And God bless them. What a hard job.
It's such a hard job. Like parenting's hard, but teaching and like I always when I have the opportunity to talk to kids, like, your teacher's a human. Like please
Yeah.
remember that like people went into teaching because they care about kids. Yeah, they end up like loving the subject that they're trying to teach you in high school. Like I always say AP physics because I could never probably pass AP physics.
Yeah.
Like it's important to, but really like Laurette as an employer, if your employee needs AP physics level or physics at an AP level, you probably could get them that resource as their employer. But
Right.
yet we're like requiring our teachers like to just it's all about this AP test versus
Yeah.
being human and recognizing, I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does. It totally does. And I think I've always tried to guide my kids, and don't take the AP classes. Don't stress yourself out more than you already are being athletes in school. And you know what? C students rule the world, as we've heard. I'm a believer of that. It's not about being perfect.
That's the whole thing. Like this conversation, it's about taking the opportunity to be vulnerable, taking the opportunity to be human. Like, I'm not perfect. Robbie was not perfect. Robbie made mistakes. I make mistakes. I continue to make mistakes. But I learn through them and I keep trying.
Both of us being, doing non for profit, we were chatting before, and I totally relate to this. So tell our listeners how they can support Robbie's Hope, how they can find you, how they can donate, because we all know these great causes require money and require staff sometimes. And so let them know how they can support this really, really important cause.
Well, that handbook that we talked about, I'm really grateful that we distribute that free. We mail them across the country to teachers and educators. They cost us 71 cents a piece to produce. And it is different getting a hard physical copy versus just perusing something quickly on the internet. It sinks in deeper.
I
So
agree. I can't
financial
read
support
enough.
to Robbie's Hope is very, very much needed. And that can be made on our website, Robbie's, ROBBIES dash HOPE.com. And then another way to support the mission of preventing youth suicide is to have conversations. Have conversations with your children, have conversations with adults, have conversations with educators. You can do that in so many different forms. Having conversations with legislators, like what are we asking for as society? What's important? So there's a lot of ways to support the mission.
And kids leading kids, I think that concept is just perfect, because that's going to be, they just trust more. I think that they're going to be more open and, like you said, more vulnerable with each other. So
They're so cool. They're
really,
so cool. They're
they,
like
they
they're so
really
scary when
are.
you're a parent, but they are so cool. Like they are just it's such a gift to be able to work with young people.
Okay, last question, lady. Thank you for hanging with me. So it's probably too obvious, but tell me what the legacy is that you would like to leave behind.
Legacy is a big, responsible word.
Isn't it? I know.
Yeah, it really is. I think maybe because I was Greek in college and we always talked about legacies and like our children being our legacy.
Uh
Um,
huh.
I just had the conversation with a girlfriend and she was talking about like, Kari, you are making a difference. And the fact that like I still, as a human, compare myself to other people working in the field. And I'm like, I'm not making a big enough impact.
I hear you. I hear you. Like that hits us in all aspects of life, right? It's like I feel like that sometimes as a mom, sometimes as a leader. It's annoying.
Yeah, that humanness. But I
Yeah.
also like, I'm really proud that I can bring to the table that I'm okay with who I am. I'm okay with the fact that I lost my son to suicide. I still am super proud of the way I parented Robbie.
You know what I think, Kari? You give other parents, particularly mothers, permission by you leading by that example. That is awesome that you're giving them permission to say, you know what? I'm still proud of the way I mothered, and everything is in divine order, you know? Thank you for all you do. And tell Jason I said hello, and I hope he has a good time in France.
I will do that. Thank you, Laurette, for your support and just being a cheerleader of
You always have it. You got some fans over at Ed Long. Trust me, there's some big time fans. So